There is one sentence buried in the Gospel of Luke that most people read past without stopping. It is 8 words long in Greek. It names 3 women, and then adds, and many others. Those 8 words contain a financial secret that changes the entire story of Jesus' ministry. Not theologically, economically, practically. Where did the money come from? Who paid for the food, the lodging, the sandals, the oil lamps? Who funded 13 men and an unknown number of women traveling through Galilee for 3 years? For 2,000 years, this detail has sat quietly in the background, rarely mentioned from the pulpit. But the answer is hiding in plain sight, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Before we go further, let me show you what we actually know. Luke 8:1 through 8:3. Read it slowly. After this, Jesus traveled about from one town and village to another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, and also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out. Joanna, the wife of Chuzah, the manager of Herod's household. Susanna, and many others. These women were helping to support them out of their own means. Out of their own means. The Greek word is hyparkonton. It doesn't mean donations. It doesn't mean spare change. It means existing possessions. Property, capital, wealth already in hand. These women were not passing a collection plate. They were drawing down personal assets to fund a traveling ministry. We'll come back to it. First, let's understand what it actually cost to keep this operation moving. 13 men, plus an unknown number of women, moving continuously through the villages and towns of Galilee and Judea. Historians estimate the group numbered anywhere from 20 to 30 people at any given time. They needed food every day. They needed somewhere to sleep most nights. They needed oil for lamps, sandals that wore out on stone roads, and passage across the Sea of Galilee by hired boat, which appears no fewer than 6 times in the Gospels. 1 denarius was the standard daily wage for a laborer in 1st century Galilee. That's roughly equivalent to $100 in modern purchasing power. A day's food and basic lodging for one person cost approximately half a denarius. Multiply that across 30 people for 3 years. Do the math with me. Half a denarius per person per day. 30 people. 365 days a year. 3 years. That's 16,125 denarii. At $100 per denarius, that's somewhere in the range of $1.6 million in modern equivalent. And that's a conservative estimate. It doesn't include boat hire, travel costs between regions, or the Passover pilgrimages to Jerusalem. To put that in perspective, the annual salary of a Roman legionnaire in the 1st century was 225 denarii. This ministry cost the equivalent of paying 73 legionnaires for a full year, just for bread and lodging. Someone paid this, multiple someones, and the logistics went beyond food and shelter. The group moved between political regions, Galilee under Herod Antipas, Judea under the Roman prefect, Perea east of the Jordan. Each crossing carried costs. The boat crossings of the Sea of Galilee recorded across all 3 synoptic Gospels were not free. When Jesus sent the 12 out 2 by 2 in Luke 9, he told them to take nothing. No bag, no bread, no money, no extra tunic. They were entirely dependent on hospitality and on what waited in each village. The women's resources were not a supplement to the ministry. They were the infrastructure it ran on. And Luke tells us who they were. Think about what that means for a moment. The most influential religious movement in human history was, at its operational core, financially dependent on women. Not on temple authorities, not on Roman patrons, not on the 12, most of whom were working fishermen who had left everything behind. Women with assets. Let's find out who they actually were. Mary Magdalene is the name most people know, but almost nothing that popular culture says about her is accurate. In 2009, during mandatory archaeological testing required before construction of a guest house near the Sea of Galilee, workers hit stone. Archaeologists were called in. What they found stopped the excavation entirely. They had uncovered the ancient city of Magdala, the town from which Mary took her name, buried under the modern landscape for 2,000 years. The site is now called the Magdala Archaeological Project, led by Chief Archaeologist Marcela Zapata Meza of Anáhuac University of Mexico. What they found was not a quiet fishing village. The excavations revealed a large marketplace with 28 commercial shops, 300 fishing weights, 40 industrial pools for salting fish, more than 4,000 ancient coins, the majority minted in Jerusalem, a mosaic floor including a depiction of a sailing boat, a first-century synagogue, one of only 7 known to survive from that period in the entire world. Archaeologists have called it the Pompeii of Israel. Magdala's full name in Greek was Magdala Taricheia. Rough translation: the tower where fish are salted. Historical sources, including the geographer Strabo, the historian Josephus, and the orator Cicero, all mention this town for the same reason. Its salted fish and fish sauce were exported to markets across the Roman world, including Rome itself. The town was the largest and most commercially active city in Galilee until Herod Antipas founded Tiberias in 19 AD. Dr. Tina Ray, biblical scholar at Salve Regina University, states it directly. We no longer have to guess. We now have real, tangible evidence that Mary was a woman of substance. In the ancient world, when a woman was identified by her town rather than by her husband or father, it meant something specific. It meant she had an independent identity, status, wealth of her own. She was not someone's wife. She was Mary of Magdala, a city, a commercial center, a brand. Picture Marcela Zapata Meza on her knees in that excavation trench in 2009. She had expected the standard scatter of first-century ceramics. Then the synagogue mosaic emerged from the earth. She stopped. She called her team over. Because this wasn't ordinary. This was the town where the woman who stood at the cross and ran to the tomb had grown up. Not in poverty, in commerce. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture the road from Magdala north toward Capernaum. Dusty limestone. The smell of the lake on your left. The sound of oar handles slapping against the sides of fishing boats in the harbor. Fish drying on racks in the sun. Salt crusting white on scales. A woman walks this road in sandals that have seen months of travel. She carries a leather pouch. She knows the innkeeper in Capernaum by name. She knows the price of bread in every market town between here and Jerusalem. She has funded this journey before. She will fund it again. Her name is Mary, and she is from Magdala. But Mary Magdalene is only the first name Luke lists. The second name is Joanna, and Joanna's story is the one that should make your jaw drop. Joanna was the wife of Chuzah. That single sentence changes everything. Chuzah held the position of epitropos, household manager, to Herod Antipas, not a servant, not a minor official. The epitropos was the chief financial administrator of the entire royal household. He managed the estates, the revenues, the staff, the accounts of the Tetrarch of Galilee and Perea. This was one of the most powerful domestic positions in the region. Herod Antipas maintained a palace complex at Tiberias, the capital he had built from scratch on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. He also held the palace at Machaerus, in the eastern hills of Perea, where he had imprisoned and executed John the Baptist. Chuzah managed the financial operations of both. His wife had access to that wealth. Here is what no one in Sunday school ever taught you. The money funding Jesus of Nazareth was flowing, at least in part, out of the same household that had just beheaded his forerunner. Joanna was financing the movement that Herod had tried to suppress. Did Chuzah know? Did he approve? Was he sympathetic? Or was Joanna moving funds without his knowledge? Luke gives us no answer. Neither does any other ancient source. The question has been sitting unanswered for 2,000 years. Think about what she risked. She was the wife of a senior royal official. If Herod learned she was directing palace resources toward a Galilean preacher, he considered a political problem, a preacher whose predecessor he had executed. The consequences could have been catastrophic. For her, for Chuzah, for their household. She did it anyway. There is one more implication no one discusses. Joanna was a court insider. She lived inside the palace system of Herod Antipas. She heard conversations. She knew schedules. She knew which advisors said what behind closed doors. She knew politics at the level of the throne room, not the marketplace. Luke, uniquely among the gospel writers, has detailed inside knowledge of Herod's court. He knows that Herod was curious about Jesus. He knows Herod's specific psychological reaction to reports of the ministry, that Herod wondered if Jesus was John the Baptist raised from the dead, and that this thought disturbed him specifically. He knows the language used inside the court. Luke 9:7 through 9:9 reads like an eyewitness account from inside the palace, not a second-hand report filtered through the crowd. Richard Bauckham, emeritus professor of New Testament at the University of St. Andrews, has proposed in his 2006 work, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, that Joanna was Luke's primary source for his Herod material, that the remarkable detail inside Luke's account of the political machinery surrounding Jesus came from a woman who had lived inside that machinery and survived it. If that is correct, Joanna did not only fund the ministry, she became its memory. A woman present at the empty tomb who had also eaten at Herod's table, who heard both sides from the inside. Luke opens his gospel stating he investigated carefully, consulting eyewitnesses from the beginning. Joanna may be part of the reason his account reads the way it does. Think about who that person was. A woman living between two worlds, sleeping in the palace of the man who killed John the Baptist, funding the movement of the man who mourned him, watching Herod's growing anxiety about Jesus from inside the court, and carrying those observations, years later, to a physician named Luke, who was writing a biography for a man named Theophilus. Every line in Luke about Herod may have come from her. That matters. We'll come back to it. The third named woman is Susanna. We know almost nothing about her. Her name is Greek. It was common among Hellenized Jewish women of the 1st century. Luke mentions her once and never again. She appears in no other gospel. No tradition preserves her city. No later text explains what happened to her. She walked into the Gospel of Luke in the 3rd verse of the 8th chapter and walked back out again. Unnamed by all of history except Luke, and by Luke only once. But here is what her presence tells us. She was wealthy enough to be listed alongside Joanna the court insider and Mary of Magdala the merchant city woman. The company you keep tells you something. Susanna was a significant financial patron, and her absence from history is a warning, not an accident. Susanna is the most dangerous kind of historical figure, the one who was important enough to be named, but not important enough to be remembered. Her story tells us something about how easily we erase the people who fund our movements, named once, then forgotten, present, counted, gone. And then Luke adds 3 words that contain an entire vanished population. And many others. Many others. Not a few, not several. Many. Women, plural, with means, plural, funding the movement across 3 years of travel. We do not know their names, we do not know their cities, we do not know what they sold or inherited or managed to accumulate in a world that gave women almost no formal economic rights. What we know is that they existed, that they gave, and that Luke chose to name 3 of them and acknowledge the rest. There is something quietly devastating about those 3 words. In the ancient world, when a historian named someone, it was an act of preservation. When he did not, they disappeared. Susanna almost disappeared. The many others did. They walked every road Jesus walked, heard every sermon the 12 heard, and history absorbed them without a trace, except for 3 words in Luke's opening summary. In the Roman world of the 1st century, female patronage was a recognized social institution. Wealthy women funded philosophers, poets, and religious movements. Inscriptions from Pompeii and Herculaneum document women who sponsored civic projects, paid for temple maintenance, funded community organizations. A patroness named Eumachia at Pompeii built and donated an entire public building. She is documented in stone. Her name is still visible on the inscription today. The women around Jesus were operating inside this same Roman patronage system. They were not anomalies. They were not exceptions. They were using a recognized mechanism of female influence in the ancient world to direct resources toward a movement that had captured their loyalty. In a culture that gave them almost no formal power, patronage was one of the few channels through which a woman could act publicly, and they used it for this. But there is a dimension here that goes beyond patronage economics, because these women did not just write checks and go home. Luke says they traveled with him, town after town, village after village. They were present at the feeding of the 5,000. They were in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. They were standing at the foot of the cross when the 12 had scattered. They were the first ones at the tomb. Luke 24:10 names them again at the resurrection. Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and others with them. The same women, still there, 3 years later. Still the ones who showed up when everyone else had disappeared. Now here is where the theological twist lives. In Roman law of the 1st century, the testimony of women was not admissible in court. Josephus states it plainly in his work Antiquities of the Jews. Let not the testimony of women be admitted on account of the levity and boldness of their sex. If you were fabricating a resurrection account designed to be believed in the 1st century, you would never, under any circumstances, make women your primary witnesses. You would use the 12. You would use respected male figures. You would not place the most important claim in the history of the world on the testimony of people whose word Roman courts would not accept. The fact that every gospel places women first at the tomb is, historically, one of the most counterintuitive details in the entire New Testament. It is the opposite of what you invent. It is exactly what you record when you are simply writing down what happened, regardless of how it looks. They funded the beginning. They witnessed the end. And then they reported what they found, knowing no one was likely to believe them. Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Susanna, and many others. They gave. They traveled. They stayed. But here is what I keep coming back to. Luke 8:3 contains a Greek phrase that almost no translation captures fully. The women supported the ministry ekton hyparkonton autais. out of what was theirs, out of their own existing possessions. Not from charity, not from surplus, from what was theirs, specifically theirs, not their husbands, not their fathers, theirs. In a world where women had almost no formal legal claim to property independent of a male guardian, Luke is making an economic statement that was quietly radical. These women had resources they controlled, and they chose where those resources went. They chose Jesus of Nazareth, Mary of Magdala, a fish empire on the Sea of Galilee, standing at a cross, running to an empty tomb, Joanna, wife of the man who ran Herod's palace, funding the movement Herod feared, telling Luke everything she had seen from the inside. Susanna, unnamed before this, unnamed after this, present, counted, remembered in 8 words of Greek even though her story was never told, and many others, whose names we do not have, who gave what they had, who showed up when the men did not, who were the last at the cross and the first at the tomb. Here is the question it leaves me with. The women who funded this movement did not know how the story would end. They gave in to uncertainty. They traveled into uncertainty. They stood at a cross that looked like a conclusion. They arrived at a tomb that turned out to be a beginning. What are you funding with what is yours? What movement, what person, what cause are you directing your resources toward in a world where the outcome is not guaranteed? If this investigation changed the way you read that passage in Luke, share it with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe if you want to follow this kind of investigation. And tell us in the comments, which of these 3 women's stories hits you the hardest, and why? The fish pools of Magdala are silent now. The palace at Tiberias is rubble. Chuzah's account books are dust, but Luke chapter 8 is still there. 8 words in Greek, waiting for someone to stop and ask, where did the money come from? Now you know.